working now. Bear with me.
Well done, Wendy.
Right, Chair, we are now live.
Right. Oh, I'm not here. Right. Good morning and welcome to East Devon District Council Virtual Planning Committee on 4th of November 2020. I am your chair, Councillor Eileen Wragg. I would also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout, and may I remind you to be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout the meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. As this planning meeting is dependent on internet connection and a power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we are not able to reconnect, we will consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all phones are turned off or are on silent, and make sure all microphones are muted when you're not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. Keep points short and do not repeat points that have already been made, and do not interrupt. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic blue hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting. Any members of the public who want to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website, www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. Can you please now unmute your microphones, and when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you've confirmed you are present, please mute your microphones again. Sarah.
Actually, that's what some of them want as well.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bloxham.
Present.
Councillor Brown. Councillor Brown.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Present.
Councillor Coleman.
Councillor Coleman, present.
Sorry, thank you. Councillor Davey.
Present.
Councillor Dasaram.
Present.
Councillor Key.
Present.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Present. That.
Councillor Pratt.
Present.
Councillor Skinner.
Different to that.
Present.
Nice.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Present.
Councillor Wragg.
Present.
Thank you, Chair. I confirm the meeting is quorate.
Thank you, Sarah. The running order for today's meeting and the speakers list can be viewed under agenda item 1 on pages 4 to 5. For the benefit of those watching online, the planning application for Ladron Bay Holiday Park, agenda item 10, has been withdrawn from the agenda and will not be considered today. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on 7th of October 2020. If anyone has a comment on the last set of minutes held then, please do so by raising your blue hand. If I have no blue hands raised, I will take this as an indication that you all agreed minutes of the previous meeting. And I don't see any blue hands, so Item 3, apologies. Wendy, please.
Sorry, bear with me. Yes, we've had 2 apologies, Councillor Gazzard and Councillor Whibley. Councillor Howe is tending to come to the meeting, but he's going to be late.
Thank you, Wendy. Agenda item 4, declarations of interests. There will be a roll call for any declarations.
Thank you. So I'll go in alphabetical order. So Councillor Bloxham,
None, thank you.
Councillor Brown,
None.
thank you. Councillor Chamberlain,
Yes, just item number 12, 201617 / full Broadclist. I am a parish councillor for Broadclist, and also I'm the ward member for that area.
Parish Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Coleman,
I'm an Exmouth Town Councillor on their planning committee.
thank you. Councillor Davey,
None.
thank you. Councillor De Sarum,
None.
thank you. Councillor Key,
None.
thank you. Councillor McLaughlin,
Yes, I have a personal interest due to the fact I met the residents of agenda item 9, which is Ottery St Mary. It's 201246 variation.
thank you. And you met the residents.
I met some of the residents there, yeah,
Thank
quite a
you.
while ago. Thank you.
Councillor Pook,
None, thank you.
thank you. Councillor Pratt,
Item 9, I'm the ward member for Ottery.
thank you. Councillor Skinner,
None.
thank you. Councillor Woodward,
None.
thank you. And finally, Councillor Ragg,
None.
thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item 5, matters of urgency. There are no matters of urgency to discuss. Item 6, confidential or exempt items. There are no confidential or exempt items to discuss. Agenda item 7, appeal statistics, pages 11 to 21. Mr. Rose to update members on the appeal statistics report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So you'll see on the agenda that there's 7 appeal decisions in front of you, this committee. Excuse me, 5 of those are dismissed, 2 were allowed. I'll just draw attention to a couple of those. So one of the applications that was allowed related to a householder application where we were concerned about the visual impact of the increase of the height of the proposal, but the inspector disagreed with us on that. The other appeal allowed relates to Woodbury Business Centre and a car park on the opposite side of the road to the business centre, which some members will recall came before committee, and there was a concern about the visual impact of the countryside of extending the business park across the road into the field, and unfortunately the inspector disagreed with the decision on that and has allowed that appeal, finding that the visual impact was acceptable. Just quickly on a couple of the dismissed appeals, members will note there's one on there for 13 to 15 High Street. Again, that was an application before committee where there was a concern about the impact from 2 dwellings on the conservation area. Pleased to say the inspector agreed with the reason for refusal on that one. And the final one to draw members' attention to is the item related to Hill Pond, where you'll see that Hill Pond Caravan Park, where an appeal was dismissed. Just for members' information on that, that application was originally refused by officers because it's proposing a hotel in the countryside, and we were of the belief that our policies say that those such hotels should be directed to our main town centres and where you can have linked trips and have got the best transport links, etc. But the applicant appealed that, and the appeal was allowed, but we challenged that decision in the courts. on the basis we feel the inspector didn't consider the policy implications or the correct policies. That JR was upheld in the court, so that meant that that original appeal, that original allowed appeal by the inspectorate was quashed, and the decision went back to the inspectorate to reconsider in light of the High Court decision. And I'm pleased to say that the inspectorate, when they considered it the second time, have then dismissed the appeal, agreeing with us that our policies say that such proposals should be located in sustainable locations, and the first position of the policy being that they should have tried to put these into our main town centres first. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask, Mr. Rose, who bears the cost of taking it to the court? You mute.
Sorry, yeah. Well, we have to bear our costs on part of that. But obviously, if we'd have lost that, we would have had to have potentially bared the applicant's costs as well. But we have to bear those costs of taking that appeal, that challenge to the court.
Thank you. Okay. Right, now we move to agenda item 8, and that is Flat 1 Fernbrook Convent Road, Sidmouth, application 201395 full. And members will remember that this was deferred because there were concerns regarding the impact on the first floor flat of the conservatory. It was a retrospective application, so it's already there. Now we have Mr. Faraday and Mrs. Beowulf. I see that Mrs. Beowulf is here.
Hello.
Morning.
Morning.
Welcome to the meeting. Right, Ms. Rose, can you present your report and to tell the speakers that they will have 3 minutes each, and you'll have a 30-second warning before your 3 minutes is up. So, Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah. As you've said, this is a retrospective application. Members will recall for a front conservatory extension. This was deferred at the 7th of October committee to gain photos from the upstairs neighbour's dwelling. So you can see the location on the screen. And so this was the conservatory that was originally in place. So note that there were some solid panels at ground and a polycarbonate roof. And the conservatory that's been built has removed some of those panels with glazing and put a glass roof on that's 42 centimetres higher, so increased in height. Members will recall that from and here's the elevation of that conservatory, which is unusually to the front of the property. But again, members may recall that that was a consent granted way back in 1991, so that conservatory is lawful. And we are at the edge of the conservation area. So members will recall these slides from before, so you can see the conservatory just above some of the landscaping and boundary walls. And as I say, it's 42 centimetres higher than the previous conservatory. There you can see the views from the street. And members recall that deferred it so that we could get views, photos from these windows of these upstairs flats from the neighbour, so that they could assess the impact from the conservatory from that neighbour. And these are those photos. So this is that right-hand view window immediately above the conservatory. So you can see the layout of the room, you can see the window, and you can just see the conservatory roof down there. And again, moving around the room so you can get an idea of the impact of the roof and the outlook. This is close to the window looking down onto the roof. And again, right at the window looking down onto the roof. Members, recall that there was a polycarbonate roof here before, but this roof is 42 centimetres higher. And again, standing at the side of the room so members can see the outlook from that window. And again. And then from the other window, the bay window to the other side, you can see the relationship down onto the roof at the angles that the photos are taken from. So going back to the assessment, The visual impact on the street scene officers are happy with. There was a conservatory there before. 42 centimetres raise in the ridge will be slightly make the conservatory slightly more visible in the public domain, but not harmful to the appearance of the area. And we don't consider, as you can see from these photos, that there's any harm to the amenity of the occupier of this flat from the increased height of that conservatory. You can see from these photos, they've still gained the views out of their window. So we don't see any harm from that. Members did raise an issue at the previous committee about ownership, which was related to the fact that this conservatory is coming up to almost the sill level of the flat above. That's been it's not a planning matter, but it has been addressed in the report. The applicant has kindly made some submission to us advising that they believe that the lower flat has the right to connect the conservatory into the wall at that point, as it's a supporting structure. So they're satisfied that from that point of view, they have the rights to do what they have done. But as I say, that's a civil matter, not a planning matter. So officers are recommending approval on the basis that the slight increase in the roof of the conservatory doesn't have a harmful visual impact on the area and not harmful enough impact on the neighbour to recommend refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Mrs. Beowulf, would you like to speak now, please? Mrs. Beowulf there?
Yes, she is. Let me just... Her camera's not working, so whether she's having IT problems. Should we move to Mr.
Yes.
Faraday first?
I think so. Then give her a chance to tune in. Mr. Faraday, would you like to begin your presentation, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair and councillors. My name is Keegan Faraday and I'm a planning consultant at Avalon Planning and Heritage, speaking on behalf of the applicant and in support of the proposal. As you're aware, this application was presented at the previous planning committee with a recommendation from the planning officer for approval. In forming this recommendation, the material planning considerations were considered to be the principal development, the visual impact, and any impact upon amenity. The application was considered acceptable in all regards at officer level. Being deferred, the planning officer revisited Fernbrook so that an additional assessment could be undertaken. The visit confirmed the view of the original recommendation in that the modifications had not resulted in any harm regarding the material planning considerations, and any perceived impact would not justify a refusal. I note from the previous planning committee and representations that there was significant discussion regarding views from flat 2 of Fernbrook, and I would like to respectfully remind this committee that private views are generally not protected through planning's remit, only outlook and natural light, neither of which have been affected by the conservatory's marginal increase in height. The other matter of contention was the ownership of Fernbrook and how the freehold was horizontally split. As highlighted in the planning officer's committee report, the boundary ownership is a civil matter outside of planning control. Nevertheless, and for this planning committee's comfort, Mr. Drake provided additional information regarding the freehold, stating that his understanding is the ground floor flat includes an easement granting the rights to support from the whole building, which would allow the conservatory's modest increase in height. Throughout the process, Mr. Drake has complied with the council's request and submitted a wealth of supporting evidence in support of this modest retrospective application. The works have been assessed at length by East Devon officers and have on both occasions been recommended for approval. In light of the above, I respectfully request this committee to consider the material planning considerations relevant to the application and vote in favour of the planning officer's recommendations for approval. Thank you, and please let me know if there's any points of clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Faraday. It's Mrs. Beowulf there now, please.
No, it doesn't seem. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to give her a quick call.
Okay.
Sorry, going to have to bear with me a moment.
Right.
Any luck, Wendy? Sarah?
Yeah, so I've just spoken to Mrs. Beowulf. Her computer has frozen. What I have, she's not sort of technical minded. So what I've said to her is for her to send me something. So maybe if we could move to comments from the members, and then when I get something through, I can read it out on her behalf.
Right. Before that, we have a statement, I think, from Councillor Bickley.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Thank
I'll
you.
read Councillor
Bickley's
please. Statement out.
Yes.
Dear colleagues, I note with disappointment that the recommendation is for this retrospective application to be approved. This despite multiple objections from local residents, including neighbours directly opposite, who have included this photograph in their objection, taken from their property, showing the visual impact of the conservatory. As regards to Mrs. Beowulf's flat above, her letter of the 23rd of October must be addressed. To see the report saying, quote, the development would clearly remain below the level of the first floor windows that serve the neighbour's flat, and the glazed nature of the roof finish would not adversely impinge to the detriment of light available to, or outlook or aspect from these windows, unquote, is tenuous at best. Clearly, the conservatory could literally be no higher than it is now, otherwise it would actually be above the sill height, which would be ludicrous. Nobody can comment on the impact to the neighbour unless the neighbour herself. To be able to see directly down into a neighbour's property has an impact on the upstairs flat, whether or not they choose to look down or not, and must feel very awkward with an element of unwanted voyeurism for the upstairs neighbour. I still believe that if this was not retrospective, permission would be denied due to the extra roof height. I believe this same logic should be applied in this case. Thank you for the chance to speak on this, Councillor Denise Bickley, East Devon Sidmouth Town Ward member. And members, I have the photograph if you'd like to see that, but I understand there are photographs in the officer's report.
There are, but if you have that one, I think it might help inform. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Mr. Rose, if you could stop screen sharing, I'll be able to share mine. Thank you.
Before you screen share, Sarah, can I just please ask if the planners have had an opportunity to look at the photographs, because we don't usually allow circulation of documents during the course of committee without prior notice. However, it's for you, Chair, to decide whether you wish to accept them.
Well, I think in this instance, because, you know, there was some sympathy for expressed at the last meeting, so I think it might help in their decision making. Although I do understand that we don't normally accept documents at the meeting. Right. Take it Mrs. Beowulf's still not with us?
No, not, and I haven't received anything yet.
Okay. In which case we'll start with the speakers. Councillor Key is first, please. Councillor Key.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Could I ask Mr. Rose if he could actually put the picture up of the outside of the, the outside picture, Mr. Rose, please. No, sideways on. No, beyond there. No, beyond the, up there, fairly close up to the, looking at it from outside there.
They're all the photos, Councillor Key.
There was another one a bit for showing the side of it, Chris, there.
There were plans, not photos.
Oh, was it planned? Yeah. Because looking at it anyway, I mean, I just feel that it's completely sort of wrong for anybody to just raise the roof like that, irrespectively. And what concerns me is that if that the flat above has to have any renovations done either to the roof or to the window, how is the scaffolding going to actually clear that roof? Because you're supposed to be a certain distance away from any structure for scaffolding. Now, with that, which is stupidly right up and underneath that windowsill, the scaffolding, if they had to have new windows in there, the scaffolding would be above the windowsill. How can you cope with that? It's ridiculous. Or if there's any repairs have to be done to the roof at all, it's got to be done. Plus the fact, if anybody was trapped in that room and there was a fire, right, they've got no way of actually getting out because of that roof has been lifted like that. And I'm very much against that, the application, because it's like the previous, I think it was the ward member was saying, if it had been applied for correctly, then I think it would have been refused. So I'm very much against the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor De Sarum.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you know from the previous meeting, I expressed my original doubts about it, and I still express doubts, as Councillor Key has said, but I would accept, as it says at page 27, is the starting point that it was lawfully put in. But I think that, as the applicant has said, that it's the issue of the visual impact, and I think the visual impact is a massive problem. And I'm not entirely convinced that this thing will integrate appropriately with the application, the surroundings. And I think that raising of the 42 centimetres higher is a problem, and for that reason, I would propose, subject to members' agreement, I would propose refusal of this, along with Councillor Key, who I presume is also in favour of refusing, because I don't think it's in keeping. And I think you've mentioned it's on the edge of a conservation area, so clearly, I think it's a wrong way round. If this was in the back garden, then I don't think we'd have any major issues. But because of the way it fronts onto the road, etc., I think it's in the wrong place. We can't do anything about it because obviously it got permission in 1991. So I'm not disagreeing with permission, but I don't think we should encourage any further development. And I think it's too near the sill level of the other flat. So for those reasons, I propose refusal, subject to what other members think.
Thank you. Is there a seconder, please?
Yes, I'll second that.
Yeah. Thank you. Right, Councillor Pook.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I'm going to go against what I don't agree with that. I think what we've got to look at is the impact of the increase in height, not the impact of the actual building. The building is there, it's lawfully there, and it's been there for some time. What we're looking at is the impact of the increase in height. And if we go back to some of the earlier comments by Mr. Rose, they've looked at the impact on the street scene. Again, going back to what I say, not the building, but look at the impact of the increase in height on the building. I don't think it has any significant impact on negative impact on the street scene. We're also looking at the preservation of a view. We know that preservation of a view is not something you can dictate through planning. And going back, I'll say it again, I'll repeat it as many times as we need to. We're looking at the impact of the increase in height. And I don't think the increase in height does significantly impact on the view, on the difference in view. If you look at all those photographs, yes, it's right in your face. I don't deny that it's in your face. But the only photograph I think it might not have been in view before would be the first one where you're way back in the room. As you get forward in the room, it would have been there anyway. And if you can imagine that slightly lower, you would have still been there. So I don't believe we're changing the impact, the negative impact from that. So the only thing I would concede is that would the new conservatory with a clear glass roof have a negative impact through light pollution if the previous conservatory was opaque, acrylic or something, and therefore not only reducing the light but also reducing the sight through. So I would say that it could be acceptable, subject to maybe some sort of condition that the roof was made opaque or had some sort of fixed covering to reduce the light pollution and also to reduce the light going in. But I will go against the other two speakers, and I would say on the basis of that, the impact of the increase in height, which is a thing we should be considering, is not necessary to refuse it. I would recommend approval in accordance with the recommendations, but I would like to have a comment from Mr. Rose on whether or not we could put a condition relating to light pollution and sort of the transparency of the roof, letting people look down into other people's dwellings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pook. Mr. Rose, could you respond to Councillor Key's concerns as well, please, regarding access to the window, the roof, in the event of repairs or replacement? I don't think that's a material planning consideration, but could you give a response on that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the scaffolding and renovation, that's not a planning matter.
No.
There will be a way of erecting scaffolding and being able to maintain that building, but that's not a planning consideration. That's for the owners of those two flats to agree and to sort out with the scaffolding company. Again, the issue of fire escape, well, that's for building control. I don't see how this conservatory changes any of the fire escape issues for that upper flat. There was a conservatory there before. This is no different. Again, not a planning matter. There was mention that if this wasn't retrospective, the application may have been refused. Certainly our officer's view is if this application wasn't retrospective and was coming in now, I don't think we would be recommending approval of it. So I don't think that position makes any difference. Yeah, and Councillor Pook's quite right. In terms of an appeal, we would have to justify why 42 centimetre increase on that height over and above a lawful conservatory that was already there is so harmful to this street scene that it just justifies a refusal. And I'm struggling to see how we would be able to put that argument to an inspector. With regard to Councillor Pook's comments, if I just address them, I don't think light pollution is going to be significantly different whether it's got a polycarbonate roof or a glazed roof. So I'm not sure that necessarily needs addressing. And in terms of, I mean, it's within members' gift to say that the roof should be obscure glaze to prevent any overlooking, but it's an unusual situation here that actually the overlooking is more from the upper floor flats into the conservatory rather than from the conservatory to the upper floor. But if members felt that that was required to create a suitable relationship, and I think that might be difficult to justify on appeal, then if members felt that that was required, then I think they could potentially justify a condition on putting an obscure glaze film to the roof to prevent any looking between the upper floor into the conservatory. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Just for clarification from my perspective, did you say that if the application came in now, if it wasn't retrospective, that we wouldn't approve it?
No, that we would.
Yes, we would.
The officer recommendation
right.
would be approval on the basis there's a conservatory there. There was a conservatory there already. Certainly, if this was a new conservatory and there was nothing there, might be a different situation. But
Thank
yeah,
you
we
for
would have
that
recommended approval.
clarification. Thank you. That clears that. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I'm going to be supporting Councillor Pook. And if he's not making the recommendation that he did, I'm not actually into any changes in conditions. And as Mr. Rose quite rightly pointed out, it is rather a little slightly different that the people who are going to be looked upon are the people that have put up the conservatory. We have to absolutely focus, as Councillor Pook quite rightly pointed out, it's not a case of this or nothing, it's a case of this being raised by 42 centimetres. And as far as I'm sorry, was it centimetres or millimetres? I can't remember now. One or the other.
Centimetres.
Centimetres, sorry. 42 centimetres. And on that basis, you know, the impact of this on a case of appeal, I think would be something we would really struggle with. I'm actually going to go along with the recommendation of what's put on the paper. I'm prepared to make my plea on that, and I will be supporting Councillor Pook if he's not already made the recommendation. If he hasn't, I will, and hopefully you may. So I'm going to move the recommendation, Madam Chairman, to see if I can get a seconder for that. Thank you.
I will second that or place it whichever way around you want to go. And this is Councillor Pook.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask Mrs. Shaw, would we take a separate vote on that, or would we build it into the conditions?
Chair, the recommendation you have before you that's been seconded first is the refusal in the name of Desarum and Key. Bearing in mind the outcome of that, then we would move on to the recommendation of Skinner and Pook.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Thank you, Chair. It's 2-2 so far, so let's see what happens next. I don't share two of the conclusions in the officer's report. On page 2 of the report, he says that there is reasonable level of hedge and tree screening on all sides of the front garden that help to mitigate the overall visual impact. If we could perhaps Mr. Rose look at photographs 3 and 4, or 2 and 3 after the diagram. So the next one, yeah, that one would be fine. You can see that there is either that one is good. There's screening there, which is fine, but it seems to me that the 42 centimeters is exactly that bit which exceeds the height of that screening. So to me, I would say that it does affect the street scene by the level of which it's been increased. So I would disagree with that conclusion in the report. The second one is on the harm to amenity to the neighbour, to the top flat. So if we go to photographs, I think 8, 9 and 10, we go on the view directly from the window. And one more. And one more again. Yeah, that one's fine. And that one and the next one, if we could just, yeah. So I accept that we're right up at the window, but as Councillor Pook said, it is actually in one's face. And I can see that if that was reduced by 42 centimeters, it would drop away at the front towards the screening at the front of the garden. So I think this is a harmful structure to the amenity of the top flat. And therefore I would not go with approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Woodward. Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's a very regrettable situation, this, and I think it would have been good if we'd had a chance to look at it before the conservatory was changed. But we do have to bear in mind that there was a conservatory already there. And so we are only really looking at the increase in height and the change to the glazing. I have enormous sympathy for the neighbour, because I think looking at the photograph we're seeing now, it is, as Councillor Woodward said, right in your face. And I think Councillor Bickley also made a good point about unwanted voyeurism. However, you could just as easily be looking down into a shared garden where you might see the neighbours out sunbathing or whatever. So you might end up with that situation anyway. And I do feel that there's no increase in the footprint of the conservatory. It's quite difficult to object to an increase of 42 centimetres. Unfortunate though that is, I think we have to remember what was already there, and it's unfortunate really that we don't have pictures to show us what was already there, because I think the conservatory would have been pretty visible from the road and from the neighbour before this increase in height. It's not vastly significant, and I think we'd find it very difficult to make this stick on appeal. I would support the idea of a condition for some kind of obscure glazing, because I think it is unfortunate that the roof was changed. I wish there'd been more consultation between the neighbours before this was carried out. I think we're almost being asked to intervene in what's a civil dispute. But the fact is it was increased without any planning permission. But I certainly support that idea of asking for some kind of, I think Mr. Rose suggested an obscure film or partially obscure film, translucent, which I think would mitigate that effect to some extent. So I am going to go with Councillors Skinner and Pook on this one.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you, Chair. The situation regarding the legal position, I appreciate that that is a matter private between the parties, but nevertheless, I see that the planning officers have inserted in the report the letter from the applicant, which sets out his opinion of the legal position. And that may not be the correct legal position anyway. But it's a matter which, regrettably, as Councillor Davies says, there doesn't appear to have been any consent by Mrs. Beowulf of this additional extension to the height of the ridge of the conservatory. My view is that what I'm looking at now, that photograph, is unduly overbearing and intrusive, and I'm not going to support the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. Right, that's all the speakers. Shirley, would you sum up? We've had a proposer, and Bruce Desarum and Councillor Key seconded. Could you sum up, please, Shirley? Mrs. Shaw, sorry.
Can we just clarify the reasons for refusal before I can summarise? And also, could we just double check if the speaker who's been unable to get through on her computer has sent us anything in representations, please?
Certainly, Mrs. Shaw. Policy EN10. I'm particularly concerned. Whilst I heard this morning we were close to a conservation area, it isn't right in terms of the fact the structure, and also what Councillor Woodward said about the screening. If you look at that first picture where the van is, you can clearly see the conservatory from a long way away. So I think it's wrong for the street scene. It doesn't match the street scene. And as I said earlier, had it been put to the back or to the rear in 1991, I don't think we'd be having this issue today. So my main concern is failure to meet the requirements of policy EN10 and out of character with the street scene. Although I know, as Councillor Davies said, there's no increase in the footprint. The problem is it's so near that sill level that it does, you know, the screen in front of our screen now shows how close it is. So for those reasons, I would move to refuse. And obviously, I hope that you have the appropriate legal skills to put it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Desarum. Right. Can we move?
Does Mr. Rose have any comment about those reasons? How does he feel about the strength of those?
Thank you. Yeah, so I don't think, well, if that's members' decision, then they're entitled to that. I think it's going to be hard to defend on appeal. EN10 I understand, but that specifically relates to conservation areas, which we're outside of. But yes, we do have to consider the view from outside of conservation and the impact on it. I would suggest that if they're going to go for refusal as well, policy D1 would be more appropriate, because that ensures that proposals have a suitable visual impact on the street scene and character of the area, which I think is what Councillor Desarum was
thank you, Ms. Rose. Yes, absolutely.
They are two appropriate policies, but I reiterate what I said before. I think this could be very difficult to justify on appeal, given that we're talking about a 42 centimetre increase in height. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we've had all the speakers on this. See, Councillor Skinner, your hand is still up, but we're going to the vote now on this one.
It was only a matter of order, Madam Chairman. It's for the benefit of everybody, and just to take a little bit of advice, because we've had a member of the public who was going to speak. She's obviously not now going to speak, I would imagine, because we're just about to take our vote. Can we have clarification that because we tried to make contact, and we're absolutely clear with that. We tried to do that, and it's not happened. And I think this is just for clarity of the planning committee. So we want sure ground. That's all that I wanted to be mindful of.
Well, we understand that, because you won't have it, but we've got the WhatsApps, and it's clear that she hasn't been able to get through. She's been asked to submit her comments, and she hasn't done it. She's not IT. Okay, so
thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Can we move to the vote then, please?
Right, okay, so I'll start with Councillor Bloxham.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Against this recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Abstain.
Councillor Coleman.
Hello, can I just Could you clarify what is it? What are we voting on this time? Are we voting on to refuse or to accept?
Refuse.
Yeah.
Against.
Councillor Davey.
Regrettably against.
Councillor De Sarum.
For refusal, as explained earlier with Mr. Rose's recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Key.
Refusal.
So you're in support of refusal?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
Against.
Councillor Pook.
Against refusal.
Councillor Pratt.
For.
Councillor Skinner.
Against refusal.
Councillor Woodward.
For.
Councillor Ragg.
Against refusal, and support the recommendation from officers.
Thank you. So, so we've got we've got 4 votes in support. We have 1 abstention and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 against the refusal. So that motion has not been carried. That has fallen.
Thank you. So
Chair,
we now,
through you,
yeah, Mrs.
if
Shaw.
it would assist, members, you've got the motion to support the officer's recommendation in the name of Skinner and Pook now on the table. Do you wish to go to a vote now, Chair, or do you wish to debate that motion?
No, I think we've had enough debate on this. Can we have a proposer for that, please?
We have
Well,
a
I'm-
proposer
The
in the name
officer's
of Skinner.
recommendation.
I've already proposed and seconded.
Okay.
Yeah, but
yes, but now it's formal because we had a proposal before to refuse. Now we need a new proposal and seconder. I think that's right, isn't it, Mrs. Shaw?
No.
Yes, Chair.
You already had one.
You already had a proposal and a seconder.
No, we can only take one proposal at a time, Councillor Skinner. You should know that. And we had the proposal to refuse by Councillor De Sarum, seconded by Councillor Key. Now we need a new proposal, and it's coming from you. You're proposing
Yes.
that we approve the recommendation. That's all I was asking for. Do we have a second to that, please?
yes, Pook.
Thank you, Councillor Pook. Now, Mrs. Shaw, do you want to sum up, or should we go straight into the vote?
Can the excuse me, Chairman, but we did talk about the potential for adding a condition, and I would just like to ask something about if the previous roof was an acrylic of some kind, it would have been opaque, and therefore, if it was an opaque roof before, I think it's reasonable to ask for a condition. And if you go to the photographs, the one that shows the majority of the roof, I think it would be reasonable to add a condition that an opaque film be put on the first, I think it's the first 3 panels, which would at least obscure any sort of downward looking. And I appreciate also that it's like a reverse condition. It's in favour of the people who will be looking over, as opposed to it's normally the other way around. But I think although it is sort of an imposition when you can't help but stand there looking out your window and looking down at people, because you will also have the feeling they're looking up at you. So I think it is reasonable, if the previous roof was opaque acrylic, that there's a condition that at least the first 3 panels are replaced or have some obscure screen on them.
Right, Mrs. Shaw, do we take that as a separate item, or can we build it into the proposal?
As the condition was proposed by the proposer, if the seconder agrees to that amendment, then we can move forward with it all in one vote.
Thank you. And I take it that Councillor Skinner and Councillor Pook do agree with that.
I don't have an issue with that, Madam Chairman. That's fine.
That's fine. Thank you.
No, I agree, of course.
Okay, so can you sum up, please, Mrs. Shaw?
Yes, Chair, you have a recommendation to approve subject to the conditions listed and also to the additional condition in relation to provision of obscure film or glazing to the roof of the conservatory. And I do apologise for the noise in the background. There are some works going on in the area.
Okay.
If members would press their green yes button in support of that motion, or the red no button if they are against that motion, or press their blue hand if they wish to abstain.
Thank you. Members, can you press your buttons, please?
So we're just going to the vote. So that motion has been approved with 8 in support, 2 against, and 3 abstentions.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we move to the next application. I believe we have 2 speakers for the long range one. And this is item 9 on the agenda, application 201246, and it's a variation. Land east of the Long Range Hotel, Wimpole, page 31. Thank you. Do we have the speakers, please?
I believe we have Amy Cater. I'm not sure if we have Mr. Dudley Prout at the moment. Let me just check the list. No, we don't have Mr. Dudley Prout. I'm not sure. Sarah, did you manage to give him a call?
Chair, I'm just trying to admit Mr. Prout at the moment. He's having some problems with joining the meeting, but he is on the line. So if you just bear with him a second.
Thank you. I just noticed there are 2 blue hands up, Councillor De Sarum and Councillor Woodward.
Withdrawn. Withdrawn.
Okay, thank you.
Left over. I'll take it down.
A leftover. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for your patience. Sarah is still on the phone to Mr. Dudley Prout, so hopefully he will be joining us shortly. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Hi, Sarah. How's Mr. Dudley Prout doing?
Sorry, he's having problems and he's joining the meeting by telephone. If we could just bear with him. Thank you.
Okay.
May I just ask through you, Chair, if we have the other public speakers in attendance for this item?
There are no other public speakers. Mr. Dudley Prout was the only one, and I think that
We
was
do have
with,
the agent. We do have
yes,
the agent.
we
Amy
have the
Cater.
agent. Can we go with the agent then? Welcome to Amy Cater, the agent. Welcome to the meeting. And you have 3 minutes
I need
to
to go
give your
first, Councillor Wragg.
presentation. Sorry?
I need to go first, Councillor Wragg.
Oh, so you do. Sorry, Chris. I think with all the waiting, I got a bit lost in time. Yes. Right. Yeah. But to go back to Amy Cater, you will have 3 minutes and you'll be told 30 seconds before the end when your 3 minutes is up. Right, Mr. Rose, off you go.
Okay, thank you. So this is an application for a variation of condition to remove a holiday high restriction to allow occupancy of these holiday lodges by the over 50s, and it relates to 12 holiday lodges that are on the site here next to the Long Range Hotel. Here we can see the layout of the 12 lodges that are already there. Lodges in design, as you can see from the elevations, and you can see the access in and the photos of those lodges. The application's before committee because there's concerns from one of the ward members of the implications from refusal of permission, which I'll mention quickly at the end. You'll note from the report that there's a previous application in 2014 for a very similar proposal, albeit for over up to 55s in age, that the then Development Management Committee considered and refused as on the basis that the site isn't in a sustainable location for unrestricted residential development. And we have this application now, but this by the new owner of the site, so not the same person that applied in 2014. And I understand the new owner purchased in around 2019. In terms of the principle of development, we're in a countryside location here. We're not at the edge or anywhere near a built-up area boundary, and we are remote from any services and facilities. So there's not really any regular bus services nearby. There's no shops, no doctors, no school, no recreation facilities. So the residents are reliant on the car. As a result of its location, there's no local plan or neighbourhood plan policies that support the proposal. The original lodge is being granted due to the tourism benefits of that, and given the restricted location, they wouldn't have been allowed as open market dwellings. There's no support from the NPPF in terms of paragraph 79 that lists those locations where dwellings in the countryside can be supported. This isn't one of those listed exemptions, if you like. And the loss of the tourism use would remove the related economic benefits that resulted in the grant of the original consent back in 2012. And you'll see from the report, this is, unfortunately, it's a very similar circumstance to a recent situation we had at Blossom Hill Park in Dunkeswell, where we refused permission and there was an appeal, and the inspector dismissed that appeal as he considered that the use going from holiday lodges to permanent residence was materially different. It would lose the tourism benefits. And as that site, which we feel is comparable to this site, was in the open countryside where open market dwellings wouldn't normally be located. I'll just run through some of the case put forward by the applicant as to why they feel the application should be granted. Firstly, though, I know we've had an email this morning from the applicant who's expressed some concern about the use of the word credibility in our report. I apologise if the applicant's offended by the use of the word. It wasn't the report's in no way trying to question his honesty in terms of the application he submitted. What we were saying is that we don't feel that the arguments that are put forward in support of the case are supported by the facts and the evidence. So if I just run through a few of those main arguments. So the first is that 11 of the 12 lodges were sold by the time that the site was purchased, so therefore the applicants found themselves in this unfortunate situation. But as we understand it, the site was marketed as a holiday park before it was purchased. There should have been due diligence carried out in terms of that purchase. The restriction in terms of the planning condition is public information. And I believe there was an enforcement case already underway at the time of purchase. So from that point of view, it's considered the applicant should have been aware of the planning restrictions at the time of the purchase and been aware that of the need to operate within that condition and restrictions. There's also concerns raised that the lodges have been missold by the previous owner to the current occupiers of these lodges, and if that is the case, then it is very unfortunate, and there's legal issues there that might need to be civil matters that need to be followed up. But what's happened there in terms of any mis-selling or how the situation's come about isn't a planning consideration that we can give much weight to in our planning balance. And that was addressed because exactly the same situation occurred with that Dunkerswell proposal, and that was addressed in that case by the inspector, who also said that the situation is unfortunate, but the planning system is concerned with public rather than those private interests. So therefore, if there has been some sort of mis-selling or something gone on similar in the past, then that's a private legal, not a planning matter. They also raised the point that the sites could be close to the services at Daisy Mount roundabouts, but that application was refused. We don't have a subsequent application in on that site yet. And in any case, that whilst that might provide some a limited range of food to be purchased, the site is still distanced from any schools, employment, doctors, or that sort of full range of goods or recreation facilities that we expect open market dwellings to be sited near. And there has been some marketing of the site done without success, but again, we feel that's short in detail and not in compliance with our guidance on how we expect sites to go about being marketed to demonstrate that there's no requirement for continued tourism use, although that isn't actually a requirement of our policy anymore. So, and there's not considered to be any other compelling arguments to make any different case to that happened at Blossom Hill, where that appeal was dismissed. So unfortunate situation where these residents have ended up purchasing these properties, maybe on the belief that they can live in them permanently, but they are restricted by the condition on the original consent. In terms of what would happen if members did determine to refuse permission, then we would have the option to take enforcement action to make sure that the residents of those units complied with the condition on the original consent. And that's what happened with the Blossom Hill site and that enforcement appeal. And in that case, we gave 12 months for the occupiers to comply with the condition, to recognise the situation that they'd found themselves in. And given the current lockdown, I doubt we would serve any notices till, well, maybe short before Christmas or after Christmas. So that would give the residents all of next year to be able to comply with that enforcement notice. So in terms of the recommendation, it's to refuse the removal of the holiday restriction tie because there's no policy support for that. It would result in the loss of the tourism use, and it would result in open market, unrestricted residential units in an unsustainable location contrary to policy. So the recommendation is for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. I believe we now have Mr. Dudley Prout in the meeting, do we?
Yes, we do. Mr. Dudley Prout, you're currently muted. If you press star and 6, that will unmute your phone for you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Dudley Prout. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you very much for having me today.
You're welcome. You have 3 minutes to speak, and you'll have a 30-second warning before the end of the 3 minutes is up. Would you like to start?
I certainly would. Shall I just go ahead? Sorry.
Please do.
Yeah, I'm just saying I'm speaking on behalf of a number of residents at Long Range Park today. My name is Jeffrey Dudley Prout, and I live with my husband at number 4 Long Range Park. We are a hard-working couple, and we are both employed by the NHS. I'm a frontline crew member with the South West Ambulance Service, and I'm actually at the Honiton station. And my husband works at the HR department in the Royal Devon Exeter NHS Trust. In order for us to be able to move to the address, we had to sell our house in Plymouth. We saw the property, which was advertised by the local estate agent, who was contacted in order to arrange a viewing. We made it clear that we had to sell a house in Plymouth prior to moving. The initial sale of the house in Plymouth fell through, and we had to wait several months before the house eventually sold. The estate agent kept in regular contact with us, and we visited Long Range Park on several occasions, and we were shown around by the previous landowner, but were never told by either of them that we needed to have an alternative permanent address to be able to live permanently on Long Range Park. If we had been informed of this, we would have never have moved to our current address. When we were informed by East Devon District Council that we were in breach of the planning permission, we were very upset and felt that we had been misled by both the previous landowner and estate agent. We contacted the agent to complain about the mis-selling, but they would not accept responsibility. We therefore made an application to the property ombudsman, who agreed with our complaint and made a judgment in our favour that the estate agent should compensate us for the mis-selling. When we first moved in, we were very happy and felt we had found our forever home. The fact is it's all on one level has become even more important as my husband Stephen has been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and may not be able to negotiate the stairs in years to come. We found our neighbours to be very friendly, and we have had a close-knit community to help each other out. There is a shop within walking distance and a bus service, so we do believe we are not isolated. We would also find it extremely difficult if we had to move. We have discussed with our neighbours what it means if we could not live at Long Range Park, and it could cause great hardship for some of the residents who are older and just want to be able to live in peace and tranquility in the retirement. We have a wide range of people living on the park, from a retired serviceman to a retired nurse, and we have all agreed that either the estate agent and the previous landlord have duped us all. Everyone is in agreement that if we had known, we would not have moved to this address. Since Darren Squires has become a landowner, our lives has improved greatly, and we understand that he was also misled by the previous owner. He wants to carry out lots of improvements on here, and I wish for the council to think that they would allow us to stay on here and live, as we have been. We love the place. It's a lovely area. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Dudley Prout.
No problem.
And I'm sure, the committee will have every sympathy for the situation you find yourself in and your neighbours.
Yes.
But however, and we, you were allowed to speak, although you were late and you hadn't made any observations, but you were allowed to speak because we do appreciate how difficult it is for you. But they are actually civil matters. Now we have the agent, Amy Cater. Is she there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You have 3 minutes. Welcome to the meeting. And you'll be told 30 seconds before the end when your time is up.
Thank you. The first point to address is the suggestion in the report that the applicant is somehow trying to mislead the council for a quick financial gain. This is incredibly unfair. The park was marketed by Fox Leisure, who are specialists in this sector, as a holiday park. The planning history on the council's website revealed the earlier applications, but no enforcement investigations. The seller was asked to confirm that the holiday use conditions were being complied with. Warranties were given that there were no breaches of planning. The applicant visited the park but was unable to speak to lodge owners on their own, which might have flushed out current issues. The financial information supplied by the seller demonstrated it was a viable holiday park business, but this was all based on misrepresentations. The applicant would never have bought the site if he had known what was going on. You've heard from one of the residents about how he and all the other residents were missold their lodges. Importantly, they were sold their lodges after the 2014 application was refused. Secondly, there's been another significant change in circumstances since the 2014 application, which is barely mentioned in the officer report. The council has since granted permission for Willowview Lakes and Lodges, which will be a high-end tourist destination very close to the application site. The new lodge development will further detract from the application site, which does not have the space to provide the facilities which would attract tourists, particularly in this area where it is isolated from tourist attractions. The council acknowledged in that application that it was a questionable location for a holiday park. The facilities that were proposed weighed in its favour. There is clearly recognition within the council that the location is not ideal for a holiday park. The fact that the application site cannot provide facilities to draw in tourists means that it is unlikely to ever succeed if the residents are forced to move from the site and the units are marketed for holiday purposes. Thirdly, the 2019 High Court case confirms that policy E18 would not apply to this site, so the council should not give this policy weight. Nonetheless, the park was marketed with Fox Leisure for at least 12 months before the applicant purchased it. It was fully developed and the price paid was market value. In respect of the lodge that is vacant, the applicant has been trying to market it for sale for holiday purposes since purchasing the site over a year ago, but the only inquiries have been from people looking to live there permanently. With regard to the Blossom Hill Park appeal, only a small number of the lodges on that park were being used residentially, and so there was clearly a demand for holiday lodges in that location. On the application site, all of the lodges except the vacant lodge are occupied residentially. There is an unmet demand for retirement park home living. These are properties that are suitable for older people and which have freed up family homes elsewhere. It is next to an existing mobile home park, so it's not isolated. It has been occupied since 2016 and there is no evidence that it has had a detrimental impact on local services. The hardship caused to the people living on the park if they are forced to move cannot be underestimated. It is a material consideration. These are exceptional circumstances and we do not consider it would set a precedent for other holiday parks, as each case must be determined on its own merits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cater. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Rose if he'd like to respond to the opening comments regarding East Devon's report on this, please.
Well, I suppose what I'd say in response to the statements you've heard there is that the applicant, our view is the applicant when purchasing this site would have had access on our website to the planning history, which includes the fact that there's a condition on the original permission and the committee in 2014 refused the removal of this or the variation of this condition to allow the units to be occupied as open market units. So I can't comment on what might have happened with the owner and how they might have treated the purchaser, or in terms of what might not have been said. But from our point of view, that information in terms of the restriction on the use of the site is on our website and was available for everybody to see when the site was purchased.
Yeah, I was referring really to the selling of the properties to make a quick profit.
I've gotten, that's not a consideration we've taken into account. I don't know this, obviously I'm aware of the circumstances that's gone on there. We are just dealing with the planning merits of this proposal in terms of what the implications are through the removal of that condition, and that's as we had with the appeal decision in Dunkeswell. The planning system is concerned with those public issues, not those private interests, which I do appreciate in this case. It sounds like a very unfortunate set of circumstances, acknowledged by the action taken against the estate agent.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. We have the ward members. Are they in? Councillor Johns and Councillor Faithful. I can see Councillor Faithful there. Is Councillor Johns here?
Councillor Johns has sent her apologies, but I have a statement that I will be reading out on her behalf.
Okay, well then, as we have Councillor Faithful, would you like to speak? You have 5 minutes, Councillor Faithful.
although I support of the officers in retaining the state of holiday accommodation, I am very concerned about the issue of enforcement. At present, we are in the middle of a pandemic in which councils are taking members of the public who are living on the streets and putting them in holiday accommodation. Why should we want to take residents in holiday accommodation and put them on the street? Present residents were missold a product and have lost out very substantially. As a district council, we are responsible for residents. We are responsible for planning and housing, not for the residents' finances. Can we please therefore allow the residents more time to address the situation and work with them at a pace that they can cope with? I do not feel that 12 months is adequate, particularly in the present circumstances. What really matters is how these properties are sold on in the future. If we wait long enough, we will not have a problem. There's already, as far as I'm aware, been 2 funerals on that site already from residents on that site already. Can we, let them go work at a pace that they can cope with, rather than put pressure on them? Because I don't think it's going to do anyone any good.
Thank you. Have you finished,
Yes,
Councillor Hayfield? Thank you. Could you read the statement by Councillor Johns, please, Sarah?
Thank you. Right, so yes, the following statements are from Councillor Vicky Johns, who's the Ottery St Mary ward member. Although I have full sympathy for the residents of the caravan park, my sympathy is for them alone. The gentleman who purchased the property has said that he was not aware of the restrictions stopping full residential use on this particular park, and yet a simple search would have called the information up straight away. The park was originally agricultural land and was granted the right to be allowed to have 12 holiday lodges back in 2012 with conditions. One of those conditions was that they were for holiday use only, and residents must have a permanent address. This application was outside the built-up boundary for Ottery St Mary and would not have been accepted if it wasn't for the fact that the buildings were for holiday use. In 2014, East Devon District Council received a variation of use application asking for the holiday condition to be lifted and allowing residents over 55 to be allowed to stay on the site as their permanent residents. This was refused. I know that in the application it was put that the applicant has therefore inherited a problem which was not of his making. If the applicant feels he was missold the site, that does not make it a planning matter, but a matter for the applicant to take up with their own legal counsel. This new application is basically the same as the 2014 application, except for the age being dropped from over 55 to over 50, and I can see no reason why it should be allowed this time, as nothing seems to have changed.
Thank you. Thank you. Could I now go back to Mr. Rose? Do you have any comments on what Councillor Faithfull has said regarding the enforcement timescale, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we if members do determine to refuse permission, then obviously we're going to take into account the circumstances that the occupiers find them in, and we've done just that with the Dunkers Well case, where we gave a long time for compliance for the occupiers, and have given a couple of exemptions for longer time given certain health circumstances of some of the occupiers. But just to explain, we wouldn't be serving an enforcement notice on somebody to at this moment in time during lockdown, because given coronavirus, we would put any enforcement action on hold until we are through that process, and then we would likely to give at least 12 months for people to try and sort the situation out. In addition to that, of course, if permission were refused, the applicant would have the right to appeal, and they would have the right to appeal any enforcement notice. So that process in itself would take a few months to resolve itself. So probably if application was refused and we had an appeal, that's probably going to take 4 months or maybe longer to resolve itself, and then the 12 months period wouldn't kick in until after that time scale as well. So I suppose I'm just saying, if we will be, as officers, sensitive to the situation those residents find themselves in if members determine to refuse permission and we have to take enforcement action. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you for that, Mr. Rose. It is a most unfortunate situation, very, very stressful, particularly for those with in frail health. However, those are civil matters. Whatever sympathy we have for them, and I'm sure we all feel sympathetic towards the residents. Now we're going to members for comments. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I'm going to reiterate, and I'm sure all the committee will reiterate, that it is a very sad set of circumstances of which the residents of this particular park find themselves in. I'm pleased to hear from Mr. Rose that in actual fact that if there was an appeal, of course that's if it is or if it isn't, and that there would be a sort of a time allowed, and I think that's where I'm likely to go with my comments. I'm going to be very much supporting the recommendation that's been put in front of us, and I think Councillor Vicky Jones made the point very well in the fact that what we do have to understand, and you, Madam Chairman, as Chairman of the committee, have made it very clear that there is a difference here between what is planning law and what is civil law, and we must put those two things into two different pots. In planning law, I don't see how I or members of this committee, and of course up to other members to decide how they feel, can support this application in any shape, way or form. And I'm actually going to propose a supporting the recommendation by the officers, which is to refuse this particular application. But I think, without adding too much more to it, I absolutely hear the sympathies of what other members, the members of the public have said. I absolutely understand that, and I have every regard for their position that they find themselves in. But I don't see how we can go along with this particular application in allowing what is potentially residential site on a piece of land where it is at Willowview. It's a 1.5 miles from my house. I know this land like the back of my hand, so I've lived here long enough that I know all of these things. It is then not to take into consideration that because of Willowview Park, which is just down the road from this particular site in some way that one joins with the other, this passed a planning application at a moment in time, and it was for what it was for, holiday accommodation. That is not residential accommodation. We must adhere to these rules. Otherwise, you can see that we could start by having people putting in for holiday accommodations, which we want to absolutely support, and then see them being trying to turn into residential for full-time accommodation. That's not the purpose or the spirit of the applications of that particular policy that we want to support. So I'm full support of trying to facilitate an increase in tourism, taking this moment in time where it is at the moment. So I think, without further ado, Madam Chairman, I would like to propose that we refuse this application, but I do want consideration to be taken, and I'm sure other members will add their views in about the length of time, and to ensure that we do our very utmost that these people, as Councillor Faithful pointed out, we're not an authority going to put people out on the street. Of course we're not, and that's something we're not going to do. But through the process, I think we do need to have something within the condition that means that we can pick up on that process. I'm sure Mr. Rose will give us the word. So I'm going to make a recommendation to support refusal. I would like a condition after other members have after they've spoken, to see if we can work out the best amount of time that we can get to give these people the best opportunity to sort themselves out in a very sad situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder, please?
Yes, I will second. No.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Davey. And I would add that Mr. Rose has given an assurance, and as he rightly points out, the applicant has the right to appeal, which would extend the time for enforcement action to be taken. So I think that is quite well covered. And as he said, officers will be sensitive to the residents' plight there. So now, Councillor Woodward, please. So we've had a proposer and a seconder.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I won't take up much time because I support the proposal. It's clearly we're dealing with planning matters, not civil matters. As a former solicitor myself, I think the applicant should go and see the solicitors that helped them at the time, if any, and then also the estate agents. But I do welcome the condition, and I think a minimum of 12 months would help, so that, but at least in planning terms, we've got to make sure that it is a holiday park, that it always under that permission, and that we don't change to unrestricted use. And I think the minimum 12 months will help the residents hopefully sort something out. And as said, nothing's going to happen before Christmas. I can see that we've got a month at least for a full lockdown. So I'm supporting the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Woodward. And we know that a very similar application of this type was taken to appeal, and our decision was upheld at that appeal. Right, Councillor Pratt.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to confirm again about the question of the buyers of these lodges, when they I assume that they were all instructing solicitors, and the solicitors would have taken a local authority search out to investigate planning matters, and the local authority search would have produced details of the planning permissions. So all the buyers would then have been on notice of the conditions attached to the planning permission. Having said all that, though, I have full sympathy with what we've heard today from Mr. Dudley Prout, and I'm sure the other owners of the properties are in similar situations. So I'm going to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. Councillor Pook.
Thank you. And yeah, I support the recommendation, but I've got a few other things I'd like to add, because there's no doubt, there's a condition that against permanent residence, but also we have to accept that we've got a built asset in our patch, on our patch, that it's for holiday use, but we could end up, if they say it's not a viable holiday use, we could end up seeing this sort of thing coming to us in another period, saying that it's unviable as a holiday use, and therefore we're going to start being persuaded that, do we pull them down, or do we utilise them? What I'd hate to see on this position, and the decision on this one is to refuse, but had we started looking sympathetically at it on the individual's basis, I'd have hated to have seen a decision made that could have been used as a precedence in future. Because I do know there's lots of sites like this. There's one not that far from here, which is the holiday home, and you've got people living on it. Some people have been living on it, and the enforcement hasn't gone through, and they've been there for some time. And there is getting this erosion of holiday accommodation turning into full-time accommodation that is costing this committee time, costing the officers time, because we're looking at them on no individual basis. So accepting that we got a housing asset here, or a built asset here, we shouldn't call it housing at the moment, we'll call it a built asset here, which could be utilised, and all over the district there's different ones of these. Is it something which maybe strategic planning should look at? And should we say, well, if we got a shortage of housing, is there something we could do on a licence basis to allow permanent residence for, say, the life of these buildings, which is often only about 20 years or something? But it would be a shame if this well-built development became unviable as a holiday accommodation and then was just left to go to rot, and we still had people putting up in other holiday accommodation, being put up in bed and breakfast because of a lack of accommodation. So, yeah, I'm not going against the proposal, and I'll agree with that. But I think there is a bigger issue here which we need to address, and maybe address through strategic planning, because this is an asset which could be valuable to the district's homeless or people who can't afford the more expensive houses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pook. Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. It was a question I wanted to actually put to Mr. Rose. I mean, you've sort of said, Mr. Rose, that the enforcement wouldn't go forward probably until the new year. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think what I was saying was we certainly won't be serving any enforcement notice that asks people to leave units whilst we're in lockdown. We don't know, you know, I know lockdown's initially 4 weeks. We then start getting to Christmas. So yeah, I think it's unlikely we will serve any formal enforcement action if it were to refuse this side of Christmas.
Yeah, okay, fine. Thank you very much for that. So, and then we all know that, I mean, how long these appeals take. I mean, they can be sort of anything from 3, 4, 6 months, really. So, and then the actual enforcement would be held over until after the appeal is heard. So, really, what we're looking at is probably a lifeline of about, could be 16, 18 months from sort of the new year. Would that be about right?
It would be, Councillor Key, yes. So that they've got 6 months in which to an appeal. If they appeal, then everything gets put on hold, and then potentially they would have 12 months from that point in which to comply. So yes, your timescale's roughly correct, yes.
Yes, and I mean, I know this is nothing to do with the planning, but I mean, that would then sort of give them quite a time to actually try and fight. I mean, it's like was said before, solicitors are involved in this. I mean, what sort of solicitor were they using if they did not do all these searches? If anybody buys a property, I mean, all the searches are usually done by the solicitor as to any problems, things that might have been built illegally and this, that and the other. So I really makes me wonder, you know, sort of what sort of solicitors these people were actually using to buy these. But I unfortunately, it is a very, very sad situation, but I have to go along with the recommendation of refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Key. Councillor Brown.
Hello, yes. Haven't had a lot to do with the Dunkerswell one because that is in my ward and I was a ward member on the last thing with it. The number of residents over there was 14 mobile homes as such that had people living in there full time. None of them used a solicitor, and they don't normally encourage people to use solicitors when they buy this type of unit. They give them forms to sign and they normally go in there, sign the forms and accept what's said to them at the time. But that is naivety on behalf of the purchasers. They went to appeal over at Dunkerswell, which, as Mr. Rosa said, they lost at the time. That was more than 18 months ago with the 14 people living there. They're now down to 18 months later, just one person still living on the site illegally, so to speak. So East Devon are very good at trying to accommodate people. So I don't think there'd be any problem if we refuse this application with East Devon trying to sort the people out. But I must go along with the officer's recommendation because, you know, that's the way it is, unfortunately.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Could I ask Mrs. Shaw to comment on the observations regarding solicitors, please?
Yes, Chair. Members probably are aware that the need for solicitors, you don't need solicitors for purchasing property. You can use conveyancers, you can do your own purchases. Therefore, that it is not the fact that solicitors have failed these purchasers if they have not used solicitors in this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you. And I can attest to that as well, because the first property that I bought, we did our own conveyancing. So it can be done. It's a bit daunting, but it can be done. And I have to say, East Devon were very, very helpful at that time. We actually had an East Devon mortgage when they were giving mortgages. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to really reiterate what Councillor Brown has just said, these people, I have spoken to some of the residents up there a while ago, and they didn't use solicitors, a lot of them, and in fact, probably most of them didn't use solicitors. They signed on that dotted line in all good faith, unfortunately. But also, I just want to ask Chris Rose, Mr. Rose, something. The Willowview Park, when I first moved into the area, Willowview Park was just literally a few dotted caravans on a piece of land. I don't know whether that was originally for tourist accommodation or not, but now that's a thriving retirement village almost, totally unsustainable in that area. And the area we're talking about is literally a stone's throw from Willowview Park. So I'm just thinking, I don't know what Willowview started off as, but just saying that again, one of the other councillors said that this may end up that it isn't viable as a holiday park and may end up as Willowview Park has done, because I don't see much difference between the two, to be honest, and it's in exactly the same location. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just looking up Willowview Park on Google Maps. I wondered what that development was so close to the long range one. I have huge sympathy for the residents here, but I trust our officers that they're not going to put people out on the streets. However, our policies are clear about development in the countryside, and the condition on this development was also absolutely clear. And there's been an awful lot of issues raised, which unfortunately are all civil matters. I'm puzzled why, when it was marketed as a holiday park, none of the residents picked up on that and maybe thought to contact the buyer. But that's not a case for us as a planning committee. It's been suggested by the agent, I think, that we have to look at each case on its own merits, and that's absolutely true. But that's in planning terms, not unfortunately in terms of humanity or anything else. And while I have great sympathy for the residents, I have to support refusal here, because we cannot have this kind of creeping, kind of turning holiday accommodation into residential in unsustainable locations. And Councillor Pook makes a very good point that in the future we may need to revisit this, but at the moment that's the situation we're in, and I think in the future we'll have to deal with these things as they come up. It looks a lovely place. It looks very nice in the photograph, and I can very much understand why people were tempted to buy a place there. But I think it's an unfortunate situation, but all the other matters are civil matters and not within the remit of this committee.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Yes, that can certainly be looked at when we review the local plan. Councillor Pratt, you'd like to come back? Councillor Pratt?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Some of these properties have been on the market. I've noticed on the websites that they have fetched quite, or they have been put on the market at quite substantial sums, some of them, depending on whether they're 3-bed or 2-bed. And it is a great shame that there have been problems with the civil side of things here, and I'm afraid that we will have to accept the fact that civil matters are private matters, and the council will have to accept the refusal of this application. But it's a great shame. I feel very sorry for the owners of these lodges. I should also just mention that the countryside around Ottery is a very good area for tourism, and there are many holiday accommodations in and around the area. There are holiday parks, there are holiday cottages, there's glamping, or whatever they call it, and I'm surprised that the applicant was saying that the site is not viable. Well, of course, there's a legal problem on the site anyway, and that's got to be resolved. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. And that is something else that will be reviewed in the new local plan when the local plan is reviewed, and that is holiday accommodation areas, because there are, as you rightly say, apart from the seaside towns, there are pockets of holiday accommodation areas, and people do like to holiday in some of the rural areas. Right, Councillor Skinner, you want to come back?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And it's just an anomaly, really. And Mr. Rose and other members and Councillor Key made the point in I think that we all agree that what we want to do is give a bit of time for the residents to sort of sort themselves out, and that would take its course. Of course, all that we can control is what is within our control. And there's been much talk about the application going to appeal. That's not in our control. It absolutely depends on the applicant wanting to go to appeal. Of course, they may or they may not. They're working on the basis of they may or they may not. Let's try to put in a little bit of security for people in understanding what we can do within our control. So what I might like to add, please, Madam Chair. Chair, is that yourself and the Vice Chair, in conjunction perhaps with the ward members, work with the planning team to ensure, our planning officers, to ensure that you all get to a good place. And one of the reasons I say that with the ward members is because the people who are discussing this are discussing it with their ward members. And I think it's really important that the ward member input into something as close as this in dealing with people. And I'm not saying the officers don't, of course they do, and will do the right thing. I fully understand that. But having the ward members' input, I think would be to a benefit and not be to a detriment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner. I'm sure the ward members will do everything they can to support the residents. I'd like to ask Mrs. Shaw or Mr. Rose whether they have any comment on what Councillor Skinner has just said.
Thank you, Chair. No, well, I think I think you would have a second recommendation in effect to go with the officers on the report, but that we before taking any enforcement action, we do that in consultation with the Chair, the Vice Chair, and the ward members, so that we can agree any timescales and how we move forward with them at that time.
Thank you. Mrs. Shaw, did you want to make a comment?
No, that was just what I was going to suggest. So as long as the proposer and seconder agree to that amendment, then
Okay. Then we'll take. If you're proposing that as an amendment, Councillor Skinner, is there a seconder?
I'll second that if you like, Chair. I don't mind working with them to make it right as Vice Chair. Fine.
Thank you,
Chair.
Councillor Chamberlain. Yes.
Chair, through you, I have a note that Councillor Davey seconded the original motion to support the officer's recommendation.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. So we take the amendment first.
No, I would suggest that you ask Councillor Davey if he agrees to that amendment prior to taking it as a separate vote.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
You agree, Councillor Davey?
Yes. Yes. I'm quite happy for local members to be involved.
So can we include that in the proposal then? Mrs. Shaw?
Yes,
yes,
we can
include
take that as
in
one
the
vote.
proposal.
If you wish me to repeat what's proposed in
if
full.
you could sum up, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Right, members, you have before you a motion to refuse for reasons set out in the report, and also with a second motion that before enforcement action is taken, the officers consult with the Chair, Vice Chair and Ward members before initiating the enforcement
Thank you.
action.
Thank you.
Apologies. If you could, when your name is called, please indicate whether you are for the motion to approve, to refuse, I beg your pardon, against the motion to refuse, or whether you're abstaining from the vote. Thank you.
Yeah, and we do vote in person. We had a minor slip earlier where we pressed the buttons, but there was a lot going on in the background, I understand. Okay.
Thank you. If I can start with Councillor Bloxham.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Coleman.
For the motion to refuse.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor De Sarum.
For motion to refuse.
Thank you. Councillor Key. Councillor Key.
Support refusal.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Pook.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Skinner.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Ragg.
For refusal.
Thank you. That was unanimous. So that motion has been approved.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Dudley Prout for attending, and also Amy Cater, and assure you, Mr. Dudley Prout, that you'll have all the assistance the District Council can give you.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate your time this morning and into this afternoon. I really wish it went the other way, but unfortunately, we're not all lucky enough to be in your situation. So thank you for your time anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. We now move on to item 14. All right. Application 20-0375, change of use. And this is Fordings at Chardstock, page 98. And we have Vicky Whitworth. Is Vicky Whitworth in the meeting, please?
Yes, Vicky Whitworth is in the meeting.
Thank you. Welcome, Vicky Whitworth. You'll have 3 minutes to speak after Mr. Rose has given his presentation. And you'll have a 30-second warning before the end of the 3 minutes is up. Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Chair. So we've got an application for construction of a pitched roof over a garage to enable its conversion to ancillary accommodation. And this application was referred to committee at a chairman's delegation meeting. So you can see on the screen here, we've got the Fordins, the property itself, and to the side we have the garage. Whilst on the screen, point out the sites in the AONB. The conservation area literally just adjoins the site at the front there, and we have listed buildings opposite and listed buildings off here to the east. You can see that the proposal relates to the garage building, which will come clearer in the plans and photos. So we've got an existing double garage with a flat roof on the site, and the proposal is to get rid of the garage doors, put a roof above with a dormer window facing the property, and this will create living accommodation at ground floor and in the roof to provide ancillary accommodation for the dwelling. And here we have the photos of the garage with the flat roof, the main host property off to the right there. There we go, you can see that in the photos. Rendered property, UPVC windows, and then you can see the view from the street with the garage set back into the site. So this is a view down the road looking up towards the host property, which is this building here on the right. And again, from further down the road and the property, and again looking down the road, so in off here to the left is the garage. So I need to reiterate that this isn't an application for a separate dwelling. It's a household application for ancillary accommodation to the main house. So think of it as an extension to the house, but a detached extension. And by nature of the application, that it's for ancillary accommodation, and the fact, and also we can control by condition to prevent it being used as a separate dwelling. You'll see in the report there's mentioned as it's a householder application, a house extension, there's no need for the applicant to demonstrate a need for the proposal or to justify the size of the extension. They're not really planning matters in this case. But the applicant has advised that they want the accommodation here to provide care for an elderly parent. So in effect, the elderly parent would live in the annex accommodation and rely on the main house. So they would interact, and care provided by the occupiers to their resident. But you'll see from the report, the main planning considerations relate to the physical and visual impact from the extension to the garage that are proposed, and its impact on the wider area. And the proposal has been amended since it was originally submitted to provide some cladding to the elevations you can see here to break up its mass, to retain a plinth feature, and to remove, originally at the rear of the building there was a shed proposed that was in close location to a tree, and that's been removed from the proposal. So in terms of the principle of development, it's an extension to a dwelling within the curtilage of an existing dwelling, so that's acceptable. With regard to the visual impact, we are within the AONB, the edge of the conservation area, and close to 2 listed buildings. But you'll see from the report, it's not considered to be any harm to the AONB landscape, given the context is of built development, and given that it could be argued that the conclusion of the pitch above the flat roof garage will improve the appearance of that garage. And is considered the same could be said for the adjoining conservation area. The cladding to the building helps break up its mass. The pitch could be argued to be improved, the flat roof garage, and as I showed in the photos, the garage is set back from the road and screened by the hedge planting and surrounding trees, such that any impact on the conservation area is considered to be acceptable and no harm. And the same arguments are put in relation to the nearby listed buildings. There's no amenity impact on the neighbours. Again, we've got the boundary treatment. The pitch at the side here will slope in, and the dormer window faces into the applicant's own property. With regard to highway safety, there's no change to the access or this parking area at the front. There'll be 2 spaces retained. That's in accordance with local plan requirements. And whilst the accommodation is there to allow the occupancy of more people on the site, we can't prevent through plan in terms of the number of people that occupy the existing dwelling. They could have 6 people in there if they wanted to, without us being able to control that. And there's concerns raised, which I understand, about the fact that the floor plans here show a 2-bedroom unit. So we've not only got the ground floor converted to the accommodation, but we've got the upper floor. And there's concerns been raised that is this make the proposal tantamount to a new dwelling in the countryside. But as I say, that's not what's being applied for. We have to consider what's being applied for, which is ancillary accommodation. And in any case, we can put a condition on any consent to restrict it, prevent it being used as a separate dwelling. And given our current local plan and neighbourhood plan policies, if an application were to come in for a freestanding new dwelling there, that's unlikely to be supported. So given that we've got a proposal for a house extension, which officers consider to be of a suitable design, so no harm to the AONB, conservation area, listed buildings, no harm to residential amenity, and subject to the condition and ensure it's ancillary and can't become a separate dwelling, then the recommendation is to approve subject to those conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to welcome to the meeting as well, Councillor Paul Hughes, Chardstock Parish Council. Is Councillor Hughes in the meeting, please?
Yes, he is.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Hughes. Now, Vicky Whitworth, you have 3 minutes. Would you like to start, please?
Yes. Yes, thank you. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank
Hello
you.
there. I'm Vicky Whitworth and I've lived in Chardstock since 2006 and I was born in East Devon. My cottage is not directly affected by the proposal at Fordings. However, I have strong objections, which I'd like to explain to you. Please be clear on what is proposed. Although the planning application describes it as ancillary living accommodation, it is in fact a self-contained new house, 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, bathroom, its own front door, letterbox, postal address, entirely separate from Fordings. A house is a house, even if it is dressed up as ancillary living accommodation. It could be rented out, Airbnb'd or sold on the open market at some point in the future. So the proposal is to build a new house. Chardstock has a legally binding, democratically arrived at neighbourhood plan, which sets out the community's ambition for additional housing in the village. The voice of the village was clear. No new houses were wanted or needed beyond 2 affordable homes. Chardstock is categorised as unsustainable in planning terms. There is no point in asking local people for their views if these are simply ignored. It undermines democracy and makes a laughing stock of the planning process. What is proposed at Fordings is backland development, a 2-storey, 2-bedroomed house squeezed into the garden of Fordings, which in itself is a sizable detached dwelling significantly extended 10 years ago. The space for the proposed house is small, currently a double garage that would have to be knocked down as building on the existing structure wouldn't meet building regulations. The front door would be less than a few yards from Fordings and slap against the boundary with the neighbours. The new house would be like a foot squeezed into a too small shoe. The site is hard up against a listed building, in close proximity to other listed buildings and so tight to the edge of the conservation area, you couldn't squeeze a cat's whisker between the two. The location is an attractive gateway into the village, and to be brutally honest, what is proposed is not a thing of beauty. It will be detrimental to the visual amenity and to the AONB. It increases car movements and is creeping urbanisation. Too much concrete is not good for our well-being. So in summary,
30 seconds remaining.
So in summary, it's not wanted, it's not needed, and it's detrimental to the rural village and to the people who live here. Please respect the wishes of the people of Chardstock and hear the concerns of the council's own officials and councillors. Please say no to this development. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Hughes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Shall I start?
Yes, please do.
Good afternoon. As part of our submission, we have supplied a visual mock-up of this proposal and hope that you have had the opportunity to review this. As a parish council, we do not support this application. Our concerns fall into two key areas. One, firstly, ensuring the principles of development contained in the Charstock Neighbourhood Plan are complied with. And secondly, regarding the protection of the Charstock Conservation Area. With regard to our neighbourhood plan, usage of the proposed new build has not been defined by the applicant. The term ancillary has been applied by the local planning department on receipt of the application. Without a clear written statement regarding usage from the applicant, we do not feel it is possible to determine this application. Information as to the proposed use has not been forthcoming despite comments that we and others have lodged, and this raises further concern. The plans show that the new build is for a two-storey, two-bedroom development within the curtilage of the existing property. As the application is not clearly described, we can only assume that the new dwelling, that it is a new dwelling, and as such, contrary to the neighbourhood plan. The Charstock Neighbourhood Plan clearly states that Charstock is unsustainable and no new houses are permitted. This statement is also clearly reflected in the adopted local plan. With regard to protecting the conservation area, firstly, we agree with the previous comments that this is backland development. If this development were approved, then 2 additional vehicle spaces would be required. The current available parking area is already occupied by 2 spaces serving the existing house. 2 additional vehicles would require double parking. This makes exit and entry from the property difficult and would compromise highway safety due to the lack of visibility and narrow public road at this location, together with a sharp bend in close proximity to the driveway. Manoeuvres onto and off the highway would be necessary to negotiate vehicles in and out of the driveway. Secondly, the proposal is immediately adjacent to the village conservation area and several listed buildings. Due to the downhill bend of the road at this point, the proposed structure will be very visible from the conservation area. It will be out of keeping and visually detrimental to the conservation area and listed buildings. And finally, the Parish Council is in complete agreement with the Conservation Officer's comments on this
30
application,
seconds remaining.
stating that the proposal is unacceptable. We ask that the Planning Committee refuses this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Paul Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, of course, I'll have to make my usual declaration that I am in my work role the clerk to Charstock Parish Council, but you've heard from the Parish Councillor. You've received the comments within the report. So this submission is my own personal one based on my role as the ward member for Yardley Ward. It's a strange situation that the previous speaker, Miss Whitworth, has actually covered all of the points that I wrote down in my submission to you. And I really can't possibly improve upon what Miss Whitworth has said. It's almost like she's after my job, but she'll have to wait a few years for that. Essentially, the 3 points I would make: one, yes, there is a serious parking concern. As a ward member, I receive constant calls and emails and correspondence about parking and traffic safety in the parish. So that has to be a consideration. The parish has been stung in the past by this creeping urbanisation, creeping development, whereby we have buildings which are new buildings. There's no two ways about it. However you dress it up, this is a new building in the open countryside, in the OMB, and in a parish that's designated unsustainable. Whether you call it an annex or an extension, and this issue has come up before the committee before and has been considered, and I believe the Parish Council is going to be very vociferous in their representations to the local plan review about what constitutes an annex, what constitutes an extension. If you were to put this to the panel on family fortunes, a self-contained building near another building would not be an annex, it would not be an extension. It's a separate building. And I appreciate you can condition it, but then the building is already there. It's already been built. The damage has been done. You are immediately adjacent to the conservation area. You are immediately adjacent to other listed buildings. And this new building is what it is. It's a modern building. It does not blend in with the vernacular of Chardstock Parish. Whilst the building immediately adjacent to it, you see there, is of the same ilk, that is not common to the parish. The parish is a beautiful, beautiful village of older buildings, and you'll see this in an application coming later. But that aside, really, I can't add anything more to what Miss Whitworth has said. I would urge the committee to refuse this on the grounds that it's unnecessary. It's not it's not needed. It brings more harm than benefit. And whilst I empathise, as we always will, with families that wish to have their relatives on site, I do have to agree with what Councillor Hughes said. There's nothing in this application in front of you, other than in the officer report, that says that's the case. This could be built, converted to an Airbnb or a holiday let almost immediately. It could be sold as a separate dwelling or come before you for another planning consent with a justification. And I'm not preempting anything that's going to happen, but this parish has seen it so many times before. We've been stung multiple times. And at some point you need to say no. Chardstock is unsustainable for a reason. The parishioners were asked to give their views, and they did in their neighbourhood plan, and that must be given significant weight. And I'm afraid this application is not in the spirit of that neighbourhood plan. So on that, I'm afraid I do propose refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Well, as you heard Mr. Rose say, this did go to Chairman's delegation, and both I and the Vice Chairman were uncomfortable with it. I'd like to ask Mr. Rose if he could comment on the neighbourhood plan to the committee, and what weight would that carry in the event that we refuse this application.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the neighbourhood plan carries full weight. So you need to give the policies in there full consideration. And Councillor Hughes is quite correct that if this were an application for a separate dwelling, then the proposal wouldn't comply with policies in the local plan or some of the policies in the neighbourhood plan. But as I said in my introduction, we have an application here it isn't for a separate dwelling, it's for ancillary living accommodation associated with a house. I appreciate the form of the dwelling, but the application forms, the fee paid, and the application type we are considering is a house extension. So it's not, they haven't applied for a separate dwelling. And as I say, we can control that in any case through a condition. But even saying that, there are policies in the neighbourhood plan and our local plan that ensure that we have development that has a suitable visual impact on the AONB, on the conservation area, on the listed buildings. So certainly in terms of assessing the visual impact of the proposal, then those policies should be given full weight, and that assessment is required.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. And am I right in thinking that the size of the main dwelling and the number of occupants is not relevant to this application?
Yes, I think I was trying to make the point that whilst this proposal could result in 2 extra people, however many living on the site, we can't control how many people live in a dwelling house. You could have a family of 6 people living in the existing house. And as it's an extension, we don't get into looking at the numbers of people that would be involved. So yeah, again, we're really looking at this as a house extension, albeit above a garage.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I've listened to all sides of the arguments, and I can understand some of the views and comments taken from the parish council, and in actual fact from the ward member as well. But we must remember what this application is an ancillary to the home. So it's as much as it's been reiterated that it's a new home, it's not a new home. There is an ancillary building is ancillary, and Councillor Hayward try to make the point about what is a home and the previous speaker as well. I actually am in support of this particular application, and I'm going to be in support of the application because this is the sort of application where we talk about and let's say family members, and it's not defined to be necessarily family members, although there is an indication that perhaps that's what it was, of families wanting to look after their own. And this to me absolutely ticks the box of what is happening here in this particular dwelling. Now, we all know that we can get our trousers tucked down and people say what they're going to say and then they do something else, but we can't work on supposition. We can't work on the basis of what might be or could be. What we have to work with is what is in front of us and what decision are we making as we move forward. So in this particular instance, in the way that there is a garage there, and it's quite right, if there wasn't a garage there, we wouldn't be looking at it the same way. It would be a new build. This is not new build. It is an ancillary building, converting a building that is already there. And I personally don't have any issues with this and the way that it's going to be done. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to support the recommendation and move the recommendation to support the officer's recommendation of approval with the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Yes, Councillor De Saram, happy to second.
Yeah, thank you. Right, would you like to speak on this, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I admit that where we are in Exmouth, we're in the built-up area boundary, but I have seen in Exmouth similar properties of similar design, and I note that overlooking won't be an issue here because the dormer window is actually facing the applicant's property, and it also complies with, as Councillor Skinner's mentioned, the care for the elderly parent. So because we're talking about, as we've said, an ancillary building as opposed to a brand new build, I feel comfortable we can approve it. I've heard the issues about parking, but page 105 of the report deals with the parking issues. And I've also heard that it's possible creeping urbanisation, but actually it isn't creeping urbanisation because they've already got the garage in situ. So they're merely transforming the garage into an alternative means of accommodation under this ancillary basis. So I propose approval, and I'd insist that that condition is put in where it says, as mentioned above, a condition can be imposed for clarity to ensure that the extension is not used as a separate dwelling. So I think that I would propose it and insist that this goes in, and to say that no further development would be permitted, because as Mr. Rose said, the neighbourhood plan clearly stipulates that a separate dwelling would not be possible. So I think we can do it on this basis because we're looking at an ancillary property. So that is my rationale behind it, Chair. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor De Saram. And condition 3 actually does say that the dwelling known as the Fordings and shall at no time be occupied, the ancillary dwelling should at no time be occupied as a residential unit independent of the Fordings. So we do have that condition in there. Councillor Key.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I mean, I fully support this. I mean, I've been past this property a lot of times in actual fact, going from Charlestown to Alston. And it's not garden grabbing, because in actual fact, it's a conversion. And I believe that the parish council said that they would knock down the building and build. Well, no, they can't do that, because if they knock down the building, there'd be nothing there, and so it would be refused anyway. So this is going to have to be a conversion. And as Mr. Rose said, that the building can be sort of put a clause on it that it can't be sold independently. It has to be contained with the existing house. And so I think that covers it being an absolutely independent property. And so I can't see any reason at all in this, and I fully support the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Pook.
Thank you. Again, we have to look at, we got all the other more personal comments being made, but if we're looking purely on planning terms, it's not in contravention of the planning policy because it's an ancillary building. That's what's been applied for. And however many times do we have to say we have to consider the application in front of us? The other objection was the negative impact on the built environment or the street scene. looking at its location and what's intended, I can't see that this is a particularly negative impact on it, especially considering the existing building. So providing the conditions as suggested are put forward, that it is definitely an ancillary building and therefore used just in connection with that main home, and considering the application we just considered about the other place, it's very clear on all the registrations that this is not an individual building. It can't come here and become registered as a house in itself. I'll be happy to support the recommendation to approve.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question for Mr. Rosary. If this is an ancillary building, annex, whatever you want to call it, and a little while ago someone mentioned, and I don't know if this is right, that it would have its own address, so would be a single address, not part of the house. Is that correct, Chris, or is that something I misheard?
So in planning terms, it comes down to the use. So as long as the building is used ancillary to the main house, so there's that independence between the two of them, then how the services might be connected or how a letterbox might work aren't really that key in planning terms. It has to have that link in terms of the use. As soon as that use separates, so if there were no longer a reliance between the two and it gained its own letterbox and postal address, that's the point where we would be saying, well, hang on a minute, you've ceased using it in association with the main house, you've now become a separate house, you need planning permission, and in this location we wouldn't allow that. So
okay,
the key is the use rather than some of the physical layout.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Yep, I'll be very quick. There's a relatively modest change to the building here in putting in a pitched roof. They're not proposing putting another story on it, topped with a pitched roof. I think they've been relatively sensitive in the type of conversion that they've proposed. It is definitely a conversion. Condition 3 absolutely states it can only be used as ancillary accommodation. So while I understand the concerns of many of the local residents and the village itself, I can't really see that there's any way it can become separate accommodation. It's effectively a granny annex, and the fact that it's slightly separate from the house is not particularly relevant here. So I'm quite happy to support this application.
Thank you. And Councillor Woodward.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's a substantial house already. It's been mentioned that it would help with care for the elderly, but I would have thought if I was caring, I would be inside the existing house and not in a separate annex. So I think it would be unnecessary to be used as a care for the elderly. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Pratt.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I must declare an interest. I'm sorry I didn't do this earlier. I am the council's representative on the East Devon area of AONB partnership, and I don't think that affects my position on this matter. On a design point of view, the proposal is an improvement on the existing building there, the garage with the flat roof. So I think that's okay. And also I'm content with condition 3, which covers the position in regard to the building being retained with the existing building. So it can't be sold as a separate unit in the future. So I'm happy with that, and I support the recommendation.
Thank you. Right, Mrs. Shaw, would you sum up, please?
Yes, Chair. Members, you have before you the recommendation to approve subject to the 4 conditions listed in the officer's report. When your name is called, please would you indicate whether you are for the motion to approve, whether you're against the motion to approve, or whether you're abstaining from the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bloxham.
For the motion to approve.
Councillor Brown.
For the motion to approve.
Councillor Chamberlain.
For the motion to approve.
Councillor Coleman.
For the motion.
Councillor Davey.
For approval.
Councillor De Sarum.
For the motion to approve.
Councillor Key.
Approve.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Approve.
Councillor Pook.
For the motion to approve.
Councillor Pratt.
For the motion to approve.
Councillor Skinner.
For the motion to approve.
Councillor Woodward.
Against.
Councillor Ragg.
Abstain.
Thank you. I can confirm that motion has been approved.
Thank you. Now, we did say we take a break, comfort break for about 15 minutes. Can we come back at about, what, just before 1:45, please? Okay, everyone?
Okay.
Agreed.
You.
Thank you. I'll stop the live stream.
Yeah.
The meeting will start, so we'll just leave that running. Be careful what you say.
Members, if we just remember to mute your microphones if while we're in a pause, we don't want to listen to your domestic